So, guess what? We're going to talk about forgiveness, and no, you don't want to run out the door. This will likely be a concept, or a point of view, a perception that you may have not ever heard before. Except for a handful of us who were in that class I mentioned last week called The Art and Practice of Living with Nothing and No One Against You. So we'll get to that in a minute. There is a twist to the process that is really wonderful. And first of all, I just want to look at some ideas together, and I've had so much fun talking with everybody that I didn't do this yet. There you go. Anybody heard of Colin Tipping and radical forgiveness? Okay. And you know that he came to that understanding and wrote the book and created this amazing radical forgiveness worksheet and process because of his own healing journey. He was diagnosed with cancer, and it was through forgiveness that he was healed. And the interesting thing for those of you who know about him is that he has had another experience of that and acknowledged that there must be more to gain from his journey on that path. And so he's sharing that with everyone electronically in the virtual radical forgiveness community as he moves through this second stage of healing for himself. So the concept of radical forgiveness as it is coined by Colin Tipping is, of course, going in deep and looking at an event that has shaped our psyche, the way that we see ourselves and things, and it has shaped our experience since then. And it is not something that we would do lightly in this fashion because it is deep personal work. So it's done individually. It's done with plenty of time and space for whatever arises. It's done knowing who you can call if you need support. I will tell you that you can get that worksheet at www.colintipping.com, and I highly recommend it. Several times throughout my life, I have found myself in a place where what I am called to do is some sort of an emotional house cleaning in order to make room for more of this possibility that we talk about all the time. Okay? So moving from that process, which is definitely recommended that you do on your own time, is this other one that comes from Gary Simmons, Dr. Gary Simmons. He's the co-creator of the Q Effect training and this art and practice of living with nothing and no one against you. And he has a very similar process. And he takes us through, there are 3 different types of worksheets, and I'm looking at the one that comes at the end of a 21-day process. We do this class about once a year here, and you can also go to theqeffect.com and learn more about him. But before we break off into what's different about this process that we're going to talk about, you probably know this already, that any one of these processes of forgiveness involves the willingness to go back and revisit, to recall something. And then it usually involves the willingness to revise it, meaning to see it again. If you've read any of the books about reframing, for example, it is some kind of a willingness to see it in a new way that offers insight and therefore healing and frees up a part of you that has been held back or burdened in some way, right? I often talk about Greg Braden's The Gift of the Blessing. And he talks about the ancient Essenes and their method of using compassion for the gift of the blessing. But the third step is often some kind of a blessing, meaning that you look at this, you willingly look at this situation, you see it with new eyes, and then you're able to glimpse perhaps what we call the silver lining. Something in that situation or circumstance that might have made you who you are today. And that in retrospect, you don't have as much regret about. Now that reading from Ken Gordon was beautiful. He's our spiritual leader, by the way, Centers for Spiritual Living. And he lives in Kelowna, British Columbia. And we know not only is resentment something that we can't afford to carry around forever without grave consequences, but any of those other limiting ideas, in this teaching we call them limiting beliefs, that we have picked up along the way are going to obviously do what? They're going to hold us back. They're going to keep us from what is possible. So when we get to what I'm calling step 3 of your average forgiveness review, is our willingness to find something good in there that came out of it. And I don't mean in a platitudinous kind of way. I mean that in retrospect, you learn something about yourself that was good. And nobody else can determine what that is for you. And we're talking about everything from a slight to a great event that may take a lot of assistance and professional work and patience and faith and trust and guts to look at. So we won't go any further except for to say that the average review, of course, includes first the willingness to look, the second to see differently, and the third to bless, as in to discover the good in some way. The fourth one's pretty obvious. That's to let it go. As some kind of a release. So we said willingness to look, willingness to see differently, willingness to bless or find the good, and willingness to let it go. And that's not so hard when you see it differently, right? Okay? It is at least by degrees easier because it's already become a different event. And the fifth one is to move on, move forward. So knowing that, let's take a look at Dr. Gary Simmons' process, which again, by the way, is really the tail end of a 3-week daily commitment and a progression towards this final process. But I want to just give you a taste of it. The fun thing that he does is he uses a basic understanding of quantum physics. And many of us at this point have heard or seen some illustration of this idea that everything exists in a wave state of possibility. And thanks to Deepak Chopra, we call it the field of infinite possibility. Thanks to so many, we can even talk about it a little bit, okay? And I'm sure that we still aggravate the scientists who have more to say about that. But we understand that everything exists in a field of infinite possibility, and I spoke about this a little bit last week. And when you think of it in a particular way, it becomes a particular experience, and all of the other ways that it might show up kind of disappear into the background. You know, not gone, just no longer visible. So what if you went back, you said, okay, I agree I'm going to go back and look. I agree I'm going to see in a new way. I agree that I'm going to look for the blessing. And then I agree that I'm going to let it go. And I agree I'm going to move on. And you add this one ingredient. Imagine that you go back to a situation that has really held you back. It's created a false set of beliefs about yourself and the world that have held you back in some way. And you say, I'm going to go back. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to imagine that initial scenario. And I'm going to put it back into the wave state, the field of infinite possibility. And imagine that something about how I responded to it, how I saw it, how I perceived it, what I made it mean, how I recorded the story, if you will, how I reacted. It's different. I'm literally going to put it back and take it out in a new way, so that when I move on, I have changed the story. For you science fiction fans, I'm confessing that I am one. This is about changing the timeline, right? It's exciting. But what we do here is called scientific mental practice, okay? We're using scientific mental practice. And do you know that you can point the creative power of thought towards your past and shift the outcome? Now, I'm not talking about waving a magic wand and changing what happened. What I am talking about is that through the willingness to go back and to see differently and to look for the good and to give it back to the infinite and pull it out in a new way before you let it go and move on, that you can change something. Here's what changes. Like I said, I just kind of had a laundry list of some of these things. We changed the attitude with which we looked, right? Because we came back willingly. We changed our perception because we agreed to revise. We changed further what the meaning is of this event because we're looking willingly with new eyes. And we are, before we let it go and move on, doing one more change. We're just sort of popping out that part of the process for a moment and saying, I may not be able to shift one iota of what appeared to have taken place in that moment, but I do have the power to change how I remember it. Now see, what we do here is we talk about the creative power of thought. We learn that yesterday's thoughts become today's memories. We learn and gasp that memory is creative. It is stored in the creative medium, subconscious, this place that is constantly connected with the creative activity of the universe. So if we have some memories that are untrue, including resentments but not limited to them, what happens? They continue to call to us people and circumstances perfectly arranged to reflect back in technicolor, in real life, full-fledged experiences that are a match for those ideas. And if they're not true, well, oh well. They still do the same thing. So, what if you use the creative power of thought and you're understanding that you can actually put something back into the wave state as if you haven't selected it, as you haven't thought of it in a particular way yet. And pause and think again and pull it out in a new way. You can do all of that with a shift in perspective. And then what would happen? Well, gosh, I don't know. But I think that might sort of be like the armchair. I'm working on this word right now. Armchair physicist's version of healing. Okay? So you say, I'm an armchair physicist and I'm doing some healing by going back and shifting the way that I see this thing, the way that I remember it. And therefore, I'm shifting everything about how it affects, how it shows up as an effect and how it affects me. So you don't change the event, but you do change the outcome. That's still huge, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So we don't change the event, but we change the outcome. Can you think of a time just recently? Let's say it was something last week. You know, 6 days ago you were so excited about it, and then 3 days ago you found out, no, it's just not going to work out. How did you feel? Did you feel disappointment? Did some part of you say, there's that feeling again. I hate that feeling. I resent that feeling. Can you think for a moment, what was the first time in your life when you had that feeling of disappointment? When you heard, no, can't do that, that's not possible, it'll never work out, who are you kidding, or something like that. Okay. So imagine then, if you go back right now, we can keep our eyes open, but just imagine with me, if you go back to that scene, okay, I know what disappointed me last week. I know that the first time I felt disappointment, I was 4 or 12, or, oh, I remember it to this day so vividly. And you go back and you say, not going to change the event. And this is more than the sort of the platitudes where we say, I know they did the best they could, and blah, blah, blah. Okay? This is quantum forgiveness. Go back and say, yes, that's how it went down. And boy, was I just so mad I wouldn't speak. I screamed and cried, I stomped my feet, I wouldn't eat my dinner or whatever. I went to my room and slammed the door. And then you think, but I am being this person who knows then what I know now. I'm great. I do live in a universe of infinite possibility. The future me has read Deepak Chopra. The future me has watched What to Believe. The future me knows so much more, okay? So you go back in your little self and you say, you're right. Now, there's nothing to do to those people around who are doing the best they can, but what if that voice in you says, I'll find a way. Yes, I can. It might take a while. I might have to grow up. I might have to go to school. I might have to get a job. I might have to get something in order for this to happen. But I know I can do it. And it becomes this passionate resolve. Now, can you just sort of imagine if you draw a timeline from that point in your remembered life to where you are now, who you are now? Is it possible that you might have taken more risks? Is it possible that you might have broken some records? Is it possible that no matter what, you might have outshined your siblings or your family members? You might have out-succeeded your village, your tribe, your peeps. There's so many terms for that, but that you actually dared to listen to that voice that said, yes, I can. Can you imagine that if you just did this once in a while, that it might not sort of lift off this cap that you've been carrying around from that first time you were told you can't do that? I can. I think it's pretty awesome. You know, a lot of us have done tons of personal work, and maybe all we've done is figured out, yup, that was the first moment. And I carry it around like a badge. Here's my wound. The moment that I was sent to the wrong school and it all went to pot. And if only. Wouldn't it be great to move forward from there? Wouldn't it be great? So why not be this imaginary science fiction, quantum mental practice person that's not going to do any harm, right? If you were to go back and rewrite some of those incidents, the earliest moment you can remember where you took on a false idea about yourself, it will open you up. And it will close the perceived gap between where you are now and this sea of infinite possibility you hear so much about. So many of us have heard about it, and then we look at our lives and we're like, well, now what? Now it hurts even more because I know what I'm missing. This is part of a transition. It's part of an awakening. So, this new idea of forgiveness says, yes, we're willing to go back and look again. This new idea of forgiveness also says, yes, we're willing to revise, to see in a new way. This new idea of forgiveness, like the old one, says we're willing to look for the silver lining. And then there's something that's added in before we let it go and move on. And that is the willingness to rewrite the story. Because this is where our power is. Not just because we have the freedom to think and feel and say whatever we want, but because the power that has. Because of the power that has. So I invite you to consider this brand new, oh my gosh, empowering version of forgiveness that is a giving forward from that first point when you took on a false idea that has held you back. These ideas that we have about ourselves and one another and the world and God's Spirit, Creator, the I Am principle, whatever you choose to call it, those shape what's called our cosmology. And our cosmology is a reason for being. It's like this full-fledged rule book You know, it's something that we can count on and refer to. And when that's not in good shape, neither are we. And we succumb to all kinds of dis-ease and addiction and confusion and half-living. So why not go back with your magic science fiction armchair quantum physicist something or other and rewrite the story? I invite you to go home today and play with that idea and see what it does for you. And come back and share that with us. Thank you.